"Who are you, and what are you doing inside my home?" I shouted at the stranger who was casually love-streaming from my bedroom. Without flinching, she claimed she was the president of a housing association, carrying out some so-called security awareness program. According to her, she had been staying in my cabin for 2 full weeks while I was away and then, with unbelievable confidence, told me that I was trespassing. When the police arrived, to my absolute shock, they actually sided with her. I was frozen, unable to form words, as my entire sense of reality collapsed right in front of me. And trust me, this story only gets more insane. Before I go further, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next will leave you questioning everything. Now, imagine this. You come home a day early from a business trip, looking forward to a quiet weekend at the mountain cabin you once shared with your late wife. Instead of peace, you're welcomed by a nightmare. That's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago, and to this day, I can hardly believe it myself. My name is Tim Scott. I'm 45 years old, and what I'm about to share will make you rethink what you know about grief, trust, and just how far some people will go for money. My wife, Becky, passed away from a heart attack 8 months ago in the very bedroom of this cabin. This place in the Colorado mountains was sacred. It's where I proposed, where we created our best memories, and the space I thought would help me heal. The cabin originally belonged to my grandfather, and after Becky died, it became my sanctuary. Every morning, out of habit, I still set 2 coffee mugs on the counter. I talk to her photo as if she's still here because honestly, that small routine is the only thing keeping me grounded. I work as an IT security consultant, which allows me to work from anywhere. So, I chose to spend time here, believing I could grieve while staying connected to her memory. But after 2 weeks in Denver for a big client project, I decided to return a day early. That Friday afternoon, the drive up into the mountains was stunning. October in Colorado, with the aspen trees glowing gold, almost felt like a sign of hope. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of optimism, like maybe I was ready to truly start moving forward. But the moment I pulled into my driveway around 4 p.m., everything changed. The lights were on, which was strange since I always shut them off. As I approached the front door, I froze inside. A woman's voice rang out. "All right, the bidding starts at $50 for this beautiful vintage wedding ring." My hands trembled as I tried to unlock the door. When I finally stepped inside, the sight nearly stopped my heart. A woman I'd never met, blonde, early 50s, and disturbingly dressed in my late wife's favorite black dress, was standing in the living room, phone raised, broadcasting live to thousands of viewers. She was holding Becky's wedding ring, the same one I placed back on her finger before her funeral, but that wasn't even the worst of it. The memorial corner I'd built for Becky had been torn apart. Her urn was missing. Photos were tossed to the floor like garbage. And to top it off, a half-naked man strolled out of my bedroom in nothing but a towel. What the hell is going on here? I yelled, throwing my bag to the floor, my voice shaking with fury. The man slipped back into the bedroom without answering, while the woman, who I later discovered was named Erin Campbell, actually had the nerve to hold up a finger, signaling me to wait while she continued her stream. With a sickly sweet smile, she told her viewers, "Oh, we've got a little interruption here. But see, this is exactly why property security education is so important. Owners who don't properly safeguard their homes create these uncomfortable situations." For 10 seconds I just stood there, stunned. Did she really just suggest that I was to blame? "Turn that off right now and get out of my house," I snapped, my rage barely contained. "That ring belonged to my wife, who died 8 months ago. You have no right to be here." Erin only smirked, digging into her designer purse. She pulled out paperwork stamped with official-looking logos and waved it at me. Sir, I need you to calm down. I'm Aaron Campbell, president of the Dean of Property Security Education Initiative. This cabin was flagged as abandoned since it sat empty for more than 2 weeks without HOA notification. I have full authorization to conduct this assessment. I'm live right now to show my 45,000 followers how critical it is to safeguard your property, Aaron announced with a confidence that made my skin crawl. She spoke with such conviction, as if this intrusion was not only lawful but some kind of public service. Before I could even respond, I heard the slam of a car door. Outside. Moments later, a knock echoed through the cabin. Relief washed over me when I opened the door to find a police officer standing there. He introduced himself as Officer Torres, mid-40s, Hispanic, with a thick mustache that looked straight out of the 80s. But what unsettled me immediately was the fact that he was holding up his phone, filming himself. "Hey everyone, Officer Torres here, responding to a disturbance call," he said into the camera before turning his attention to me. "Sir, we received a report that someone was threatening a property security specialist." My jaw dropped. "Officer, this woman broke into my home. She's selling my deceased wife's jewelry online. I need her arrested right now." Torres glanced between me and Aaron. She was still live streaming, still in control of the narrative, and somehow painting herself as the victim. With polished ease, she launched into her rehearsed speech about educating homeowners on security. Negligence, even flashing the same so-called document she had waved in my face earlier. What disturbed me most wasn't her lies. It was that Torres seemed to actually be buying them. He even asked about her follower count, as if her social media reach somehow validated her claims. I tried to cut through the madness. I showed him my driver's license with the cabin's address, explained that my grandfather had left me the property, told him about Becky's death, and how this cabin had been our home. But every point I made, Aaron countered smoothly, spinning the story as though she was doing me a favor by exposing my vulnerabilities. That's when another car pulled into the driveway. The door opened and in walked Madison Rivera balancing a tray of coffee cups. She owned a little coffee shop 10 minutes down the mountain, and the concern on her face was genuine the moment she saw me. "Oh my goodness, Tim, what's happening? Are you okay?" she asked, rushing over. Her timing couldn't have been more perfect. Madison was around my age, with warm dark hair and kind eyes that reminded me just a little of Becky. Since moving here full-time, I'd visited her shop often. And during my hardest days, she always checked in with kindness. Without hesitation, she stepped into protective mode. She offered me coffee, then calmly told Torres that she'd known Becky and me for months, that this was absolutely my home, and that Aaron was clearly exploiting my grief. Madison even mentioned that Becky had shown her where we kept a spare key, something Becky insisted on when her health declined, just in case I came home late from work. Her words carried the kind of weight mine hadn't. Torres finally asked Aaron to step outside for a private conversation. As they spoke on the porch, Madison stayed with me, kneeling to help pick Becky's scattered photos off the floor. "Tim, I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said softly. "Some people have no respect for loss. But you're not. Alone, we'll figure this out together." That kindness hit me hard. After 8 months of struggling through grief and silence, having someone simply stand beside me felt like a small miracle. When Torres returned, his expression was weary. "Mr. Scott, this looks like a civil dispute between you and the HOA. Miss Campbell's paperwork appears legitimate, and you clearly have proof of ownership. My advice is to settle this through legal channels. It's not a matter for law enforcement. Right now." With a smug grin, Erin gathered her streaming setup, packed her gear, and strutted out with her male companion acting like she'd just scored a victory. As the door shut behind them. Madison and I sank onto the couch trying to make sense of what just unfolded. My eyes darted to the memorial corner and my chest tightened. "Where are Becky's ashes?" I whispered. The urn was gone. Madison helped me search every inch of the cabin, but we came up empty. That's when it hit me. Aaron had no idea I'd recently upgraded the security system. 6 cameras were easy to spot. But the 7th? That one was my secret weapon disguised inside the smoke detector above the fireplace, wired directly into the house with no wireless signal to give it away. "Madison," I said, pulling up the hidden feed on my phone. "I think I know how. We can catch her. I think we're about to uncover the truth," I muttered as I pulled up the hidden footage. My stomach churned with equal parts dread and anticipation. The first clip showed Aaron arriving with several men, hauling in bags and supplies like they were setting up camp. But when I skipped ahead to day 4, my heart nearly stopped. There she was carrying Becky's urn out to the dumpster, tossing it in like it was nothing more than trash. Then, as if nothing had happened, she strolled back inside and resumed her live stream. Madison gasped, hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Tim, she just threw Becky away like garbage. Who does that? What kind of monster would treat someone's ashes like that?" I couldn't even respond. Watching my wife's remains discarded so casually felt like losing her all over again, but this time it wasn't fate. It was deliberate cruelty. But as we combed through more footage, something else stood out, something far more sinister than just theft. The camera hidden in the smoke detector revealed Aaron wasn't simply squatting in my cabin. She had orchestrated an entire operation built around exploiting Becky's memory. For hours, Madison and I sat side by side, scrubbing through 2 weeks of recordings. What we uncovered was beyond sick. This wasn't a desperate woman looking for valuables. This was a carefully engineered business scheme. Months in the making, with my late wife as the centerpiece. From the very first day of my Denver trip, Aaron settled into the cabin like she owned it. Men rotated in and out, treating my home like a private getaway. But that was just the surface. The real nightmare revealed itself when we saw the online listing. Becky's bedroom, her actual deathbed, was being advertised on vacation rental sites as Angel's Memory Room, an authentic grief experience. The listing charged $400 a night, promising guests a spiritual connection by sleeping in the very bed where Becky had passed. Professionally staged photos and flowery marketing language made me sick to my stomach. Feel the sacred energy of transition in this intimate space. One caption read, "Guests report spiritual healing, emotional breakthroughs, and a profound connection with eternal love." She had literally turned Becky's death into a tourist attraction. What made it worse were the glowing 5-star reviews. Life-changing experience. I felt her presence all night. The energy here helped me heal from my own grief. But when Madison and I traced the accounts, we discovered the truth. They were all fake. Each profile was stitched together from stolen obituary photos and memorial websites. Every review was fabricated to make her scam look legitimate. And the money? It was staggering. In just 2 weeks, Aaron raked in $3,200 from these fake bookings. Not a single guest had actually stayed there. The phantom reservations weren't just padding her bank account, they doubled as her excuse for being in my cabin. If anyone questioned her, she could point to the bookings as proof that her presence was justified. "This isn't just trespassing anymore," Madison said, furiously taking screenshots and jotting down timestamps. "This is fraud, Tim. Full-blown organized fraud. She's got fake documents, fake customers, fake revenue. It's all part of a system." She was right. And the terrifying part? I realized Aaron had probably pulled this stunt before, maybe dozens of times. But the scam didn't stop with the fake rentals. No, she had also been turning Becky's belongings into live streaming content, auctioning off pieces of her life for quick cash. I watched, sick to my stomach, as Erin held up Becky's chipped honeymoon coffee mug, the one she had refused to throw away because it meant so much, and sold it to her audience for $85. Erin didn't stop at the coffee mug. She sold Becky's reading glasses, her collection of bookmarks, even the meditation cushion she used every morning. Each item came with a dramatic backstory she made up on the spot, turning my wife's personal belongings into props for profit. And the live stream scam? It was even more elaborate than the fake rental scheme. She had cultivated an online community of 45,000 followers who thought they were learning real lessons about home security. Every lesson involved her holding up Becky's jewelry, clothes, or diaries, claiming they were examples of sentimental items that irresponsible homeowners leave exposed. Her audience, none the wiser, donated money, bought merchandise, and placed bids on Becky's possessions, believing they were supporting a genuine educational program. The worst part? Erin didn't just sell things. She performed grief. She slipped into Becky's wedding dress for the camera. She sat cross-legged on Becky's meditation cushion, reading from her personal diary passages about her illness, her fears about dying, and her hopes that I would survive the heartbreak. My wife's most private words were being broadcast as psychological case studies to thousands of strangers. Madison's reactions during all of this were raw and supportive. She'd get visibly angry when we saw particularly cruel moments, then soften to comfort me whenever the footage became too overwhelming. She also asked questions that cut right to the core. How did she know you'd be gone exactly 2 weeks? Madison wondered aloud. And how did she manage to move in so quickly? Someone must have tipped her off. That suggestion made sense. So we decided to visit my neighbor Connor, who lived about a quarter-mile away. Maybe he'd noticed something unusual during the weeks I was gone. When we arrived, Connor was outside taking detailed photos of nearby houses, including mine. He brushed it off, saying he was documenting properties for insurance improvement purposes. But when I asked if he'd noticed anything odd at my place, he slipped. I saw some activity. Yeah, but I figured it was just the property management company handling things. Property management company? My heart sank. I'd never hired any such service. I told him so immediately. Connor froze, then stumbled over his words, backtracking, claiming he must have mixed up my cabin with someone else's. But the damage was done. Under pressure from Madison, he eventually admitted that weeks earlier, a professional-looking woman had shown up with paperwork, introducing herself as part of a program for temporarily managing properties for grieving homeowners. It was clear. Erin had fed him a cover story, and he'd accepted it without much thought. When Madison and I returned to the cabin, she pointed something out that chilled me to my core. Tim, look at these timestamps again. She didn't just pick your property at random. She knew exactly when you were leaving and exactly how long you'd be gone. Someone gave her inside information. She was right. The footage showed Erin arriving within hours of my departure, fully prepared with supplies, documentation, and a plan for a 2-week occupation. This wasn't chance. It was calculated. And then I noticed something else. The camera log showed Madison herself had visited my property 47 times in the 8 months since Becky's death. That was far more frequent than I remembered the surveillance. Logs revealed something else unsettling about Madison. Her visits weren't random. They always lined up perfectly with the worst points in my grieving process, arriving right after nights when I hadn't slept, after afternoons when I'd been buried in legal paperwork, or on days when I'd clearly been struggling. Her timing was so precise it felt less like coincidence and more like she had an invisible window into my private life. Still, I tried to rationalize it. In a small mountain community, news travels fast. Maybe neighbors had mentioned when I seemed down, and she just showed up out of kindness. As we wrapped up reviewing evidence together, Madison suggested escalating things. This is too big for small-town police. Tim, you need specialist investigators who deal with organized fraud and identity theft. Her logic was solid, and I appreciated having someone who could think ahead while I was still reeling from the emotional weight of seeing Becky's memory turned into a business, but there was a detail in the footage that I couldn't shake. Madison's 47 visits weren't just tied to bad days, they spanned the entire period since Becky's death. The first recorded appearance was only days after the funeral. She'd been coming to my property from the very beginning of my grieving. Her explanation had been that Becky asked her to look out for me, but the timeline didn't add up. Becky had been alive during the early months of Madison's visits, and she'd never once mentioned forming any kind of bond with her. In fact, given how worried I'd been about Becky's isolation during her illness, any new friend would have been something she'd proudly tell me about. Yet there was nothing. That realization left a knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with grief. Something about Madison's story was off. The next morning, I decided I needed answers without her there to influence things. I drove back to Connor's place, determined to push harder this time. He was outside again, camera in hand, but now he was openly photographing my cabin from his driveway. From that distance, he had the perfect vantage point to monitor everything. Came and went, when lights were switched on or off, and whether any cars were parked outside overnight. "Morning, Connor," I called out, keeping my hands visible, my voice steady. "Mind if we have a real conversation about what you've been seeing?" He nearly dropped his camera, stammering something about bird watching. But the evidence was sitting right there in plain sight, a manila folder resting on his truck's hood. Inside were dozens of professional quality photographs of my cabin. Every door, every window. Even close-up shots of the exact hiding spot where Becky used to keep our spare key. This wasn't casual neighborhood curiosity. It was a meticulous property survey. I held up one of the photos, my voice sharp. "Connor, what the hell is this? Are you working with Aaron?" His face went pale, shifting through a dozen expressions: shock, fear, denial before landing on something that looked a lot like guilt. "Tim," he muttered finally, "I swear, I didn't know what she was really doing. Especially considering I thought we'd only interacted casually at her coffee shop. When I asked her about it, Madison explained gently, Becky mentioned you to me before she passed. She worried about how you'd cope alone and asked me to check in on you. I didn't bring it up before because I didn't want to add to your pain." It sounded thoughtful, and I felt grateful. But deep down, something about the timing unsettled me. Becky's decline had been so sudden. I didn't recall her ever mentioning Madison by name. Connor finally admitted the truth. "She hired me to do a property appraisal," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Told me she worked with a property management group that helps grieving homeowners. Paid me $800, seemed legitimate." Suddenly, his strange behavior made sense. He wasn't plotting with Aaron. He was just a real estate appraiser caught in her web of lies. Connor showed me the paperwork she'd given him, and it was disturbingly convincing. The contract carried the letterhead of something called Mountain Memory Management Services, complete with a Denver address, working phone line, and polished website. The language outlined specialized services for recently bereaved families, temporary caretaking, memorial preservation, and grief-sensitive property management. "She said you were too overwhelmed to handle things yourself," Connor continued. "She even had testimonials, business cards, the works. Honestly, Tim, if I'd been in your shoes, I'd have believed it too. The only way to uncover the scam would have been to check the state licensing board. And who does that when everything looks official?" By the time I returned to my cabin, Madison was already waiting, coffee in hand, concern etched across her Face. I told her about Connor's role, but as I spoke, I found myself studying her differently. For months, she'd always known how to comfort me, what to say, when to show up. But now, her empathy felt rehearsed, like a skill she'd polished rather than something natural. And then I noticed it. On her hand was a ring I had never seen her wear before, a plain gold band with a tiny diamond. My chest tightened. It looked exactly like Becky's engagement ring. No, that wasn't possible. Except, the longer I stared, the more certain I became. Becky had worn that ring every day for 7 years, right up until her medication caused her fingers to swell. 3 months before she passed, she tucked it into the jewelry box in our bedroom. Madison, I said carefully, forcing my voice to stay calm. That's a beautiful ring. Where'd you get it? For just a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, panic, maybe, or calculation. She glanced down at her hand as if surprised to find it there. Oh, this? It's old. Been in my family forever. Belonged to my grandmother. But her voice, it didn't sound like her. It sounded like she was reading from a script she never expected to use. And I knew that ring too well to be mistaken. Inside the band was a tiny inscription. Forever and always. A relic from Becky's teenage boyfriend, something we used to laugh about. There was no way Madison could have a ring with that exact marking. Mind if I take a closer look? I asked, trying to keep it light. Becky collected vintage pieces. Guess I picked up a little jewelry nerdiness along the way. Madison froze, her entire body tense before she pulled her hand back protectively. Then came the excuses. Too fragile to handle, sentimental value, she was late for work. All reasonable on the surface, except she hadn't been in any hurry until I asked about the ring. When she finally left, I forced myself to do what I'd been avoiding for months: open Becky's jewelry box. My heart sank. The engagement ring was gone. So was her grandmother's necklace. And the pearl earrings I gave her for our 5th anniversary. Truth hit like a sledgehammer. Madison hadn't just stolen Becky's jewelry after she died. She'd been inside our bedroom while Becky was still alive, taking things from her during the most vulnerable months of her illness. The cruelty of it. It made me want to smash something. But I couldn't lose control, not now. If Madison was tied to Aaron, I needed to outthink her, not just react. If Madison really was part of this conspiracy, then I'd been confiding in the enemy for 8 straight months, handing her my deepest grief and most private thoughts. I needed proof. So the next time she visited, I set a trap. I casually dropped fake details about Becky's final weeks, lies I knew Madison couldn't possibly confirm. I told her Becky had wanted to redecorate the bedroom, that she'd been planning a trip to visit an old college roommate in Montana. I even mentioned a heart medication that never existed. Madison didn't hesitate. She nodded sympathetically, even adding details claiming Becky had personally shared those exact worries with her. That was it. The Madison had the world's most vivid imagination. Or she'd never known my wife at all. That evening, everything unraveled. Erin came back. But this time, she didn't sneak in. She arrived with confidence, professional lighting, multiple cameras, and an entire production crew. My home wasn't just being occupied anymore. It was being turned into a studio. From my hidden spot, I watched in disbelief as Erin slipped into Becky's wedding dress, surrounded herself with my wife's belongings, and prepared to film. But then my blood ran cold. Madison walked in, not as a supportive neighbor, not as a bystander, but as Erin's co-host. They moved around the set like seasoned collaborators, adjusting angles, fixing props, planning shots. This wasn't their first time. This was routine. Welcome back to property security education, Erin said cheerfully as thousands tuned in live. Tonight we have a very special episode featuring my colleague Madison. And Madison stepped into frame without hesitation. Her voice was steady, her presence polished like she'd done this 100 times. She began lecturing about psychological vulnerabilities, how criminals exploit grieving homeowners, how to recognize when someone is too emotionally fragile to defend their property. The irony was nauseating. She was standing in my living room, surrounded by Becky's stolen belongings, wearing Becky's stolen jewelry, while teaching people how to prey on people like me. Then came the worst part. Madison started outlining long-term manipulation strategies. She explained how predators insert themselves into the lives of widowers, how they become indispensable during the darkest hours. You position yourself as the only person who truly understands their pain, she told the audience. Once they believe that, they'll do anything to keep you around. My stomach turned to ice. Every coffee run, every sympathetic look, every perfectly timed visit after a sleepless night or difficult day. None of it had been kindness. None of it had been real. It was strategy. Madison hadn't just been helping Aaron exploit my property. She'd been engineering my grief, weaponizing it from the very beginning. The hidden camera revealed one last piece of evidence that shattered any lingering doubt. As their broadcast wrapped, Madison casually bragged that she had been managing this subject for 8 months, and that the dependency protocol had been more effective than expected. She wasn't talking about theory. She was talking about me. I wasn't just a victim. I was their case study, a live experiment in grief-based psychological control that they were now packaging as training for thousands of predators. And then I saw it. On Madison's hand, Becky's engagement ring. The very ring that had vanished from our bedroom months before Becky died. Watching her wear it while pretending to comfort me made my blood run cold. Drop a comment if you've ever had that gut feeling that someone close to you wasn't who they claimed to be. Because what I uncovered next could have saved Becky's life. If only I had trusted my instincts sooner. The following days were the most mentally draining of my existence. Every morning I woke up and forced myself to keep playing the part of the broken, trusting widower while secretly conducting my own investigation. Madison had no idea I was testing her. I called them my trust traps. I'd casually feed her fake details, claiming I was in debt, inventing arguments with Becky's family, even suggesting I might sell the cabin and move back to Denver. Without fail, within 24 hours, those exact lies appeared in Aaron's live streams as examples of common homeowner vulnerabilities. The pipeline between Madison and Aaron was airtight, but her manipulation wasn't limited to conversation. One day, I deliberately left my laptop open with fake emails about selling the cabin, then excused myself. When I returned, the laptop hadn't moved an inch. But the browser history told the truth. Madison had accessed my private email, bank statements, even my text messages. She wasn't just offering comfort. She was profiling me like a subject in a lab, mapping out my finances, relationships, travel patterns, even my emotional triggers. When I swept the cabin carefully, the truth was worse than I feared. Audio bugs, hidden trackers in my truck, keyloggers buried in my computer, and worst of all, tiny cameras in my bedroom aimed to capture my sleepless nights, my breakdowns, even the moments I whispered to Becky's photo. My grief had been harvested, like data points in an experiment. Meanwhile, Aaron escalated her side of the operation into something resembling a military exercise. Every morning at precisely 8 a.m., she would show up with cutting-edge counter-surveillance gear, RF scanners, thermal imagers, spectrum analyzers, even jamming devices that could block wireless signals for half a mile. But she wasn't just sweeping. She was performing, broadcasting every scan, every sweep, every technical demonstration to her 45,000 followers, turning my home into both her classroom and her battlefield. Today's lesson is all about thermal signature detection. Aaron declared, sweeping my cabin with a piece of high-grade military tech. This tool picks up the heat trail left by electronics, even when they're hidden behind walls or disguised as everyday objects. Her audience wasn't just watching, they were absorbing a masterclass. The chat scrolled nonstop with people, asking how to bypass cameras, dodge motion sensors, and spot transmission signals. Erin wasn't running a safety tutorial. She was operating a criminal academy disguised as a home security livestream. Within 10 days, she had dismantled nearly my entire surveillance system. 6 of my 7 cameras were identified and disabled. Each one turned into a live demonstration for her 45,000 followers. She'd use RF sweeps to catch wireless devices, thermal imaging to locate concealed power draws, and signal analysis to uncover transmission frequencies. It was methodical, precise, something you'd expect from intelligence operatives, not a YouTube educator. But her arrogance saved me. Erin was so obsessed with hunting complex tech that she overlooked the simplest trick. My smoke detector camera, hardwired, self-contained, with no wireless signal and no unusual heat signature, remained invisible to all her scans. That device kept recording when everything else was gone. Madison, meanwhile, was orchestrating her own brand of violation. She had perfected the art of weaponized empathy. She always showed up at the exact moment my grief peaked, coffee in hand, soothing words ready, making it seem like she had some sixth sense. But I knew now it wasn't intuition. She had planted bugs throughout my cabin and was eavesdropping on my private breakdowns, swooping in minutes later to play the savior. Her manipulation was chilling in its precision. Madison had studied trauma counseling techniques, grief psychology, and behavior analysis, then twisted them into tools of control. She validated my pain just enough to keep me trusting her, but always steered our talks toward detail she needed: financial concerns, family issues, my mental stability. Worse, she had been quietly dismantling my social support network. When Becky's sister reached out, Madison would intercept, claiming I was too fragile or needing space. She made me seem distant and unreachable, cutting me off from anyone who might have noticed the truth. Slowly, she positioned herself as my only lifeline, and then came the revelation that took this from disturbing to truly professional. Officer Torres wasn't just turning a blind eye in exchange for clout. He was a full-blown partner. He even appeared on one of Aaron's live streams, styled as a guest expert, explaining how law enforcement could frame victim complaints as exaggerated or unfounded. It turned out he'd been collecting $2,000 a month for a year and a half, offering more than silence. He trained them on avoiding charges, pointed them toward corrupt contacts in nearby jurisdictions, and even walked them through loopholes that made prosecutions nearly impossible. Worst of all, he used confidential police reports to help them identify which types of victims would never be believed. And then I found the smoking gun. Madison had a meticulous database on dozens of locals in the mountain community, spreadsheets filled with financial breakdowns, family histories, psychological weak points, and step-by-step plans for how to approach each target. This wasn't a scam. It was an organized criminal enterprise, and I was their model victim. Madison's victim selection wasn't random, it was calculated. She had mapped out the entire mountain community like a predator's hunting ground. Recent widows, elderly, residents battling chronic illness, families buckling under unemployment, anyone whose life upheaval left them emotionally or financially unstable. They were all potential marks. Her coffee shop was the perfect disguise. It wasn't just a business, it was her intelligence hub. Behind every warm smile and casual check-in was an evaluation. She logged every heartbreak and setback like data points. A sick husband? Noted. A foreclosure risk? Highlighted. A grieving parent? Flagged. To the community, Madison was the friendly cafe owner who remembered your troubles. In reality, she was conducting screening interviews for victimization. I decided to turn her own hunting ground into my battlefield. I began frequenting the cafe daily, sitting at different tables, watching her pattern. What I saw confirmed everything. Her methodical charm, her probing questions, the way she leaned closer at the exact moment someone's voice cracked with vulnerability. She was farming the community for suffering. But then I found something that obliterated any doubt audio files Madison had hidden away. Recordings of Becky's final weeks. She hadn't just appeared in our lives after Becky's death. She'd been infiltrating long before, posing as a counselor, a volunteer, even a neighbor who just wanted to help. Becky had been too trusting, too weak to suspect a thing. And I'd been so consumed with work and caregiving that I failed to notice. The rotating roles Madison played in our lives. The recordings revealed her true cruelty. Madison had steered Becky away from her prescribed medication, urging her to try natural supplements that would boost her strength and ease the strain on her heart. I could hear Becky's fragile gratitude, thanking Madison for caring enough to research alternatives. I could hear Madison's steady, persuasive tone as she dismissed the doctor's treatment as harmful, masking symptoms instead of healing. What Becky didn't know and what Madison knew all along was that those supplements contained compounds that clashed fatally with her heart medication. They hadn't just weakened Becky, they killed her. Becky's death wasn't fate. It was murder by manipulation. And Madison's motive wasn't only theft, it was the creation of a perfect victim, me. By engineering Becky's decline, Madison ensured I would be broken, isolated, and desperate for the very kind of support only she could offer. My grief had been manufactured to order. The final proof came from Madison's own hubris. Her surveillance devices hadn't just captured my private breakdowns, they'd recorded her strategy calls with Aaron and Torres. Hours of cold, clinical discussion where she dissected my psychology, my attachment style, how long my grief would last, when I might attempt to rebuild trust. She spoke about me like a specimen in a lab, charting which manipulations worked best and how to keep me dependent. That was it. I was done playing their victim. I began mapping my counterstrike Operation Becky's Justice. It wouldn't just expose them as scammers. It would reveal them as predators, conspirators, and killers. Step 1. Deception. I told Madison I was taking her advice at last, that I'd booked a grief retreat in Arizona. I even showed her fake confirmation emails. "You're right," I said, studying her face. "I think stepping away from the memories will help me finally move forward." Her reaction was instant, almost giddy. She encouraged me to go, practically ushered me out of town with offers to watch the property, asking about my schedule, my travel details, my exact departure. But Madison didn't know that while she thought she was running the play, I'd already upgraded my defenses. Not wireless, not heat generating, not detectable by any of Aaron's advanced toys. A new generation of surveillance, silent, invisible, untouchable. This time, the hunters wouldn't see me coming. I built the system the way an engineer builds a black box for an airplane, something that could survive anything. No wireless signals, no detectable emissions, no heat signatures. Just hardwired cameras buried into the bones of the house, recording to redundant storage drives tucked where no one would ever think to look. If Madison and Aaron thought they'd swept me clean, they were dead wrong. The footage I captured wasn't just incriminating, it was devastating. They thought I was gone, thought they were safe, thought they'd won. And so they celebrated. At first, I just sat there in disbelief, watching them on my monitors from a hidden position in the woods. Madison, Aaron, and Officer Torres arrived within hours of my stage departure, hauling in champagne, food, and what they called post-op debrief materials. 2 others showed up later, faces I didn't recognize but who clearly belonged. To the network. My living room, Becky's living room, turned into their command center and party hall. They popped the cork on the champagne Becky and I had been saving for our 10-year anniversary and toasted to the success of Operation Tim. What followed was the most detailed self-incrimination I've ever witnessed outside of a courtroom. They laid out victim files like trophies, photographs, financial ledgers, psychological assessments. 17 confirmed operations over 3 years. More than $400,000 stolen. Plans to expand their model into neighboring states. And then Madison stood, glass in hand, and gave what sounded like a keynote speech. She called herself the emotional management specialist. Her words cut deeper than any knife. I had him pegged within days of Becky's death, she said. Perfect target, isolated, overwhelmed, desperate for connection. His grief made him predictable, pliable, and completely trusting. Exactly the kind of subject we designed this model around. The group laughed, clinking glasses while I clenched my fists in the dark. Every manipulation, every carefully timed visit, every sympathetic word, it had all been scripted, rehearsed, executed with military precision. But then Madison whispered something to Aaron that froze my blood. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about property. It was about Becky. Something they had done to her before she died, something I never knew. Was the moment it finally broke me. For 48 hours I sat in silence, staring at the recordings, listening to the evidence over and over, unable to move. The grief was like drowning all over again. But then something inside me hardened. Becky always said I only truly scared her when I wasn't angry at all, but furious in a way that turned cold and methodical. That was the side of me she saw now, the side Madison and Aaron never expected. From their carefully groomed victim, I wasn't going to law enforcement, not yet. I wasn't going to bury this in evidence lockers or watch Torres bury the case with it. No. I was going to burn their empire in public. So I got strategic. For 3 days. I worked without sleep, organizing the recordings, financial documents, victim files, and murder evidence into a single devastating package, a documentary, a confession reel, a record of evil so undeniable the world wouldn't just believe it, they'd never forget it. And when I was done, I named it the only thing that mattered, Operation Becky's Justice. The dependency routines they designed worked exactly as intended. But the detail that froze my blood was Madison's offhand confession about Becky's death. The so-called medication mix-up hadn't been a tragic accident at all. She laughed while explaining it, like she was describing the weather. With access to Becky's pill organizer and complete knowledge of her prescriptions, she said it was effortless to trigger heart complications that appeared natural. And she was right. I'd been so consumed with being the perfect caregiver that I never questioned what was happening. Her words gutted me. Sometimes you have to move the timeline forward to maximize emotional vulnerability. My wife hadn't just died, she had been murdered to make me easier to manipulate. Madison had poisoned Becky, not only for property access, but to ensure I was broken enough to cling to her. The supplements she recommended had interacted fatally with Becky's heart meds. For 8 agonizing months, I believed I'd failed my wife when the woman comforting me was actually her killer, but I had everything on tape. Every word, every confession, every method, every victim file. Over the next 12 hours, I stitched the footage into a 2-hour expose so airtight that no one could deny it. The documentary was titled, How Grief Predators Murdered My Wife and Trained Me to Trust Her Killer. At exactly 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, I released it across every social platform. Within hours, it went viral, 5 million views by lunchtime. The outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Survivors came forward with their own testimonies, revealing this wasn't just my story, it was a nationwide epidemic. The hashtag grief predators exploded, trending across the country as families shared warnings, resources, and their own painful stories of exploitation. By week's end, major networks were running investigations, influencers were amplifying the story, and Madison's cafe had been shuttered by furious protesters. Erin's massive online following turned on her overnight, calling for her arrest. Torres was suspended and exposed for covering up their schemes, along with 3 more corrupt officers in neighboring counties. Federal agents moved in quickly. Madison was arrested and charged with murder, fraud, and organized crime. Erin faced theft, conspiracy, and dozens of charges tied to her broadcasts. Torres was indicted for corruption and aiding cover-ups. None were granted bail, especially after investigators uncovered their plans to expand nationwide, preying next on military families struggling with deployment trauma. But the greatest justice didn't come from the courts, it came from the community. My neighbors banded together, restoring the cabin to the way Becky and I had built it, honoring her memory instead of letting predators define it. And if you're watching this right now, remember this: predators thrive in silence. Don't let them. Share this story. Protect your loved ones. And never forget, sometimes the biggest threat doesn't come from strangers, but from those who smile while holding your hand. They built a memorial garden where Becky's recovered. Ashes were finally laid to rest. Yes, we actually found them buried in a landfill, exactly where the video showed Erin had dumped them. More than 100 volunteers came together, combing through mountains of waste for 3 days straight until we recovered nearly 70% of Becky's remains. It was enough to give her the dignified resting place she had always deserved. That garden became more than a personal sanctuary. It transformed into a communal space of remembrance, where other victims of the network could come and honor their own loved ones. Support circles formed there, resources were shared freely, and for the first time, true healing began, not just for me, but for many families who had been manipulated in their darkest hours. The legal process stretched across 6 months, but justice was firm. Madison received life in prison without parole, along with extra consecutive sentences for fraud and conspiracy. Erin was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution for life. Torres lost his pension, was stripped of his badge, and received 12 years behind bars, permanently banned from government service. 17 other members of their network, spread across 6 states, were identified, arrested, and convicted. Most importantly, the case reshaped laws nationwide. New legislation required strict verification for property management companies, harsher penalties for preying on grieving families, mandatory reporting for suspicious death-related activities, and federal oversight over local law enforcement handling of victim complaints. Becky's death had been twisted into exploitation, but her story now served as a shield protecting countless families from future abuse. Financial restitution followed as well. Assets seized from the network, combined with court-ordered payments, brought significant compensation for both stolen property and the psychological harm victims endured. I chose to donate most of my share to organizations fighting elder abuse and predatory schemes, keeping only enough to ensure Becky's memorial garden would remain cared for forever. Half a year after the convictions, I was finally learning how to breathe again. But then came a call from a detective in Arizona. He said military families near a base outside Phoenix were being targeted in ways hauntingly similar to what had happened to me. He'd seen my story and asked if I would consult. On their investigation, justice had been served. Becky's ashes were home. The predators were locked away. But then came the words that froze me. "Mr. Scott, we found Becky's medical records in our suspects' files." That's where we'll leave today's story on Listen HOA Stories. Should Tim dig deeper into what really happened to Becky, or are some truths too dangerous to uncover? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story shook you the way it shook me, don't forget to hit like, share this video, and subscribe to listen to HOA stories for more gripping cases. Until next time, stay safe out there.